Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. Guess what, you all? We have finally made it to the final 3 chapters of Thousand Autumns Volume 3, also known as Qianqiu by Meng Ci Shi. And I don't know about you all, but I need to know what's about to happen. So, without prolonging things, let's just get into this. Chapter 83, Alarming Danger. Arnyang, do you know what you're saying? Yuan Xian almost suspected his ears had failed him. Douyan sniffled. I saw everything. I was just to the side. His Majesty was on the bed, gravely ill. Then cousin came over and he said... Having suddenly met her close family member, she was a little agitated and flustered, unable to even form complete sentences. Yuan Xian placed a firm hand on her shoulder and helped her sit. Don't panic, he said. Take your time. Su Wei personally poured some water and handed it to her. Holding the warm cup, Douyan gradually regained the strength to speak. Cousin came over to visit His Majesty, she said. But then he said to him, Why haven't you died yet? The sooner you die, the sooner I can succeed the throne. Each day you linger is another day I can't relax. I went to all this trouble to get you bedbound in the first place, yet you won't just stop breathing, tormenting me for no reason. Douyan was a precocious child and well-versed in classics, so it wasn't difficult for her to repeat this conversation word for word. Previously, she'd even admonished Yuan Yong, telling him to uphold his responsibilities toward the country even in the face of slander and not to treat Empress Ashina so coldly. Yuan Yong adored this niece of his very much, even lamenting that she hadn't been born a man. He'd raised her since she was small, keeping her close by. When Douyan was even younger, she'd spent several years in the palace. Though she returned home later, she could still enter and leave the palace freely, without needing to pass through layers and checkpoints like most other people. Douyan was renowned for her intelligence in the imperial family. Yuan Xian didn't doubt the veracity of her words in the slightest, and his shock and outrage were plain on his face. He really said something like that? Douyan nodded. After His Majesty fell ill, cousin's long-repressed temper gradually began to reveal itself. I didn't want to meet him too much, so when I heard that he was coming, I found myself a place to hide within the bedchamber. That's how I heard cousin say that to His Majesty. His Majesty was furious and called him unfilial and insolent. He even wanted to have someone draft an imperial edict to remove the crown prince. But cousin told His Majesty not to waste his efforts, and then... Her hands clenched around the cup and her face was pale. She was unable to conceal her terror. It was as if she'd returned to the scene on that day, when she'd hidden behind the thick curtain and saw, through a gap in the drapes, Yuan standing next to the emperor's bed. He'd leaned over, drawn up the blankets covering Yuan's body, and then... He smothered His Majesty! Yuan smothered His Majesty! I saw it all! Douyan began to sob, unable to stop herself. For a time, no one in the room spoke. There were only the sounds of heavy breathing and Douyan's weeping. Yuan Xian's expression flickered like the shifting clouds. He was frozen in place, stunned into silence. Su Wei held a look of unfading horror. He'd always done his best to avoid court politics, to live peacefully away from any government offices. He'd refused to take up any official position no matter the invitations Yuan Yong sent. The only reason he'd taken the risk to shelter Yuan Xian was due to his close personal relationships with the likes of him and Puliu Rujian. He'd never expected to hear such an earth-shattering inside story about a treasonous plot for imperial power. Fathers and sons slaughtering each other within the imperial household was no shocking news, but Yuan had already been instated as crown prince for a long time. The imperial throne was set to pass into his hands sooner or later. If even under these circumstances Yuan had been so impatient, so eager to kill his father, he was truly devoid of all consciousness. Shen Qiao asked Douyan, Yuan knew that you overheard him? Is that why he's seeking to capture you? Do-Yan nodded, her eyes red. As I was hiding inside, I didn't dare to move even a little. I was terrified that Yun would find me, so I only came out after he left. When he went outside and announced the news of His Majesty's death, I took advantage of the chaos to rush out. But Yun saw me and suspected that I saw him murder His Majesty, so he sent people to my house to tell me he wanted me to enter the palace, under the pretext of wishing to reminisce with his cousin. Do your father and Princess Xiangyang know about this? Asked Sue. My cousin's always been paranoid, she replied. I was afraid that if he knew what happened, he'd let something slip in front of him, so I dare not reveal anything to them. Father and mother believed I am only racked with grief over the previous emperor's passing. Cousin sent people to our house as soon as he ended the national mourning period. I was afraid that father and mother wouldn't be able to stop him, so I secretly ran away myself. I wanted to go to Bian residence to seek help there, but it turned out everybody was already gone. At this moment, there came the sound of knocking. Sue opened the door and went out. A moment later, he returned with a bowl of piping hot noodle soup. Yan must be hungry, he said. Eat something first. Do-Yan was only a child after all, not yet even 10. Regardless of how bright and composed she was, she had gone without meals for some time. When she saw that bowl of noodle soup, she couldn't stop herself from drooling. She lowered her head and began to eat without a second word, the composure from her lavish upbringing vanishing without a trace as she practically wolfed the soup down. Yuan Xian's heart ached at the sight. He couldn't help but say, Eat slowly, lest you choke. Did the former emperor fail to realize that Yun was such a person? Asked Shenqiao. He too had met Yong once, and the man hadn't seemed like he'd been so foolish. Sue realized that he'd yet to introduce Shenqiao, so he said to Yuan Xian, Your Highness the Prince of Qi, this is Taoist Master Shen from Xuandu Mountain. Yuan Xian sighed. Taoist Master Shen might not be aware, but back when the former emperor was still alive, he was very strict in disciplining the crown prince. He knew that the crown prince was an alcoholic, so he forbade so much as a drop of alcohol from entering the Eastern Palace. The crown prince has been dissatisfied for a long time, but as long as the former emperor was alive, he could only buckle down and endure it. He didn't need to say anything more. Shenqiao already understood. Because Yun had repressed himself for so long, his nature had inevitably become twisted, turning him tyrannical and murderous. But his father had been in his prime, and he didn't know when he'd be able to succeed the throne. Unable to wait any longer, he went in for the kill. As for whether Yun would have been able to assassinate Yong by himself, even considering his status as crown prince, that question was irrelevant at the moment. Yong had prohibited Buddhism and Taoism, vanquished northern Qi, and he'd been preparing to go to war with the Gokturks. His enemies were everywhere, and there were many who'd have been willing to work with Yun to bring him down. Even considering only Empress Ashina, who was conveniently in the position closest to Yong, she would have had far more opportunities than most. Shenqiao suddenly thought of Yan Wushi and his previous evaluation of Yuan Xian, his inferences on Northern Zhou's imperial court, and its situation. Right now, one by one, they were coming true. When he recalled that scene within the small temple, his heart trembled slightly, and he couldn't help but draw in a deep breath to forcibly suppress it. I heard outside the city that Yun has been busy erecting new buildings and constructing palaces, he added. And that he's also arrested many people who submitted memorials advising him against this. Shenqiao wasn't a citizen from Zhou, and Yun was also very unpopular. No one thought it inappropriate that he'd address the emperor by name. It's a long story, said Sue. After the former emperor passed away, in accordance with the rites, he should have been in mourning for over a month, but His Majesty only observed it for a dozen days or so before he declared the mourning period over. Many people from the court submitted their advice at that time, asking His Majesty to observe filial piety. But His Majesty said that since the ancestors of the Yuan clan were Xianbei people, there was no need to observe Han etiquette, and that the ministers shouldn't babble nonsense about the affairs of the imperial family. If anyone tried to advise him afterward, he unilaterally declared them rebels and traitors, then punished them with flogging and exiled their entire families from the capital. His Majesty also complained that the palace he's currently living in is too cramped and lacks the splendor appropriate of the imperial family. Yuan Xian added. Therefore, he wanted to renovate the palace and build a garden inside it for members of the royal family to hunt in. The previous leadership's conquest of Qi had already exhausted a fair amount of both manpower and finances, but the former emperor refused to impose heavier taxes on the common folk. Instead, he had his people confiscate all the valuables obtained from the Qi palace and place them in the national treasury. But the moment His Majesty ascended the throne, he took these valuables and transferred them into his personal treasury. He smiled bitterly. Many people submitted memorials because of this and were quashed by His Majesty. Shun Qiao frowned. A brilliant father, yet an unworthy son. Such a pity. Would the Zhou dynasty's fortunes, that had seemed to be rising like the sun, truly come to an end in his son's hands? Yuan Xian shook his head. The Taoist master is focused on the martial path, so he may not understand the intrigue and infighting that takes place within the imperial court. With this move, His Majesty appears to be diverting funds for his own use, but in truth, he's using the opportunity to eliminate descendants and probe out the people who are truly loyal to him. Those strongly attached to the previous emperor or those who are unwilling to wholeheartedly follow His Majesty will naturally take the initiative to uproot them, lest he leave behind any lurking perils. After all, His Majesty spent many years as the crown prince, so he's naturally experienced when it comes to plotting and scheming like a ruler. Indeed, said Sue icily. He's completely ignorant in the matters of statesmanship, but a born genius when it comes to eliminating descendants, to the point His Highness, the Prince of Qi, was forced to seek me out for refuge. Yuan Xian let loose a bitter chuckle. Recalling how Yan Wushi once spoke of wishing to support Yuan Xian, Shun Qiao said, If this humble Taoist may speak frankly, there goes an old saying, just causes will garner great support, while unjust ones find little. I fear that Yuan's perverse actions have rendered the previous emperor's blood and sweat to naught, and the Zhou dynasty's excellent prospects will also be ruined as a result. Now that Qi has been annexed, it's on shaky footing. The Gok Turks are also eyeing the situation covetously as they wait for an opportunity to take action, but the Prince of Qi has always been a man of prestige. Yuan Xian gestured his acknowledgement. He didn't put on any act of being alarmed or bewildered. Rather, he said with a dejected expression, I know what Taoist Master Shun wishes to say. After His Majesty ascended the throne, he confiscated my military authority and ordered others to monitor my residence day and night. My entire household, both young and old, are being held under house arrest. Leaving aside the great kindness the previous emperor showed me, I've never possessed such intentions. If I really did conspire against the state, wouldn't I be doing exactly as he wants and making it easy for him to brand me a rebel and traitor? Taoist Master Shun might be unaware, said Sue, but after the previous emperor passed, His Majesty began removing the bans he'd imposed, one by one. He also reinstated Buddhist Master Xueting as state preceptor. The noble consort Yuan, currently by his side, is also a lay disciple of the Buddhist masters. With a great Buddha like Xueting overseeing things, eliminating Yuan through assassination would be completely impossible. To say it more directly, as someone who held little leverage, Yuan Xian was unwilling to start an open conflict over this issue. Dou Yan had long finished her noodles. Her complexion had become rosy again as she listened intently to the conversation. Yuan Xian took notice of this and smiled. I haven't thanked the Taoist master for escorting Yan here. It was no hardship, said Shun Qiao. The Prince of Qi need not dwell on it. Did you come here for important matters in Chang'an, Taoist master? Yuan Xian asked. I was entrusted with something by an old friend, said Shun Qiao. I'd come to the capital wanting to see how the former emperor was doing, but unexpectedly, I was a step too late. This old friend you speak of, is it Junior Preceptor Yan? Correct. Even as early as the group ambush, sect leader Yan had already foreseen that great things might suddenly descend upon the capital. Before, he said to me that if anything should happen to the former emperor, I should look for the Prince of Qi. Yuan Xian smiled bitterly. I understand what sect leader Yan meant, but he overestimated me. As of now, I hold very little military authority. What would I gain from starting a war, other than creating rivers of blood and causing innocent people to lose their lives? But your highness surely cannot simply sit idle and wait for your demise, Su Wei protested. You've led troops for many years and hold incredible prestige among the military. You have no soldiers now, but if you rise and sound the call, many people will answer. At that point, there may still be a chance to turn things around. And what if Yuan holds my family hostage? Yuan Xian said angrily. What can I do then, Are you saying that I should disregard their lives and focus only on achieving the throne? Then what difference would there be between Yuan and myself? Such actions are neither reasonable nor justifiable. Yuan is the rightful successor. Even if he really did that to the previous emperor, how many people could know? If I bring my men and charge into the palace, with Xue Ting there, he could easily take Yuan and retreat. Then they could declare him king in some other place, and the Zhou imperial court would be plagued with internal strife once more. The north we managed to unify with such difficulty would vanish completely. Those were the things my brothers and I laboriously fought for all these years. How can I watch myself become the criminal who plunged the Zhou dynasty into turmoil? Su Wei said nothing. Douyan seemed to understand. Tears on the verge of falling glimmered in her eyes. Shun Xiao couldn't hold back yet another sigh. Some people were bound from birth to be kind and tender-hearted. It didn't matter whether they'd killed before or even how many they might have killed. During these times of turmoil, these types could never become conquerors of great and ruthless ambition. Even if Yuan Xian knew what to do, he still wouldn't be able to do it. Yue, you've always been reluctant to interact with the imperial clan, he went on. The reason we can be so amicable and close is because I'm different from the imperial clan members who place so little importance on human life. But now you're actually urging me to take that road? Su Wei gave a long sigh, then cupped his hands in a bow. I was the one who misspoke. Please forgive me, Your Highness. Yuan Xian stopped him. You're the one who understands me best. Others might say that I was born a rich aristocrat with military power, that I galloped across the battlefields and slaughtered countless enemies. But if I had a choice, I would never have joined the army. I'd rather find a place with verdant hills and crystal waters, take my entire household there, and do some gardening. Now that would be a true paradise on earth. But the heavens toy with men. Now the mighty Prince of Qi, renowned throughout the land, could only hide here and languish. Seeing everyone in low spirits, Yuan Xian instead took the initiative to ask Shun Xiao, what does the Taoist master intend to do? Shun Xiao thought for a moment. Does the Prince of Qi know where Bian Mei went? Yuan Xian shook his head. After the previous emperor passed, the Bian residence was vacated overnight. No one knows where they went. I suppose Biansheng must have long anticipated the current disaster, so he fled very early on. He's much more far-sighted than I am. If Taoist Master Shun doesn't mind, said Su Wei, why not stay at our Su residence for now? You did a great favor in the past, and it's often on my mother's mind. My younger brother also admires Taoist Master Shun's moral character and martial arts. Now that this coincidence has occurred, I can also bring my mother and brother to pay you a proper visit. Yuan Yong had died and Bian Mei had disappeared. Though Shun Qiao wished to find Yan Wushi quickly, he had no idea where to start searching. He could only slowly make inquiries about Huanyue sect's or He Huan sect's activities. Chang'an was well connected as a location. News arrived here much faster than it did in other places, so staying here temporarily wouldn't be a bad choice. With this in mind, Shun Qiao replied, Then I'll be troubling the Duke of Meiyang County. Su Wei smiled. You need not be so courteous, Taoist master. You can simply call me Wu Wei. They were still talking when they heard a knock from outside. Su Wei went to open the door and was greeted by a trusted maid standing beyond it. Sir, 2 people have arrived at the back door, 1 adult and 1 child. The former said he was a personal soldier of the Prince of Qi, named Yan Ying. He said that he'd come with the youngest master from the Prince of Qi's residence and wishes to speak with your highness. Su Wei frowned. How did they know that the Prince of Qi was here with me? But Yuan Xian answered, if it's Yang Ying, he truly is one of my right-hand men in the army. Perhaps it was my princess consort who told him to bring Qilong here for refuge. Let's allow them in first. I'll go meet them. Su Wei led them through the dark passage they'd taken earlier, moving from the study to the guest hall, where the maid hurriedly left to deliver his message. After a moment, a young man entered, followed by the maid with a young boy in his arms. Yuan Xian was both surprised and delighted. Yan Ying, you brought Qilong with you? The other man fell to his knees with a thud, his eyes filled with hot tears. Your Highness, you've worried Yang Ying so much. Rise, rise, said Yuan Xian brightly. Men should not shed tears so easily. Why are you kneeling? Stand up. He took the little boy from Yan Ying's arms, and the child held Yuan Xian's face with both hands. After staring at him intently for a while, he suddenly said, Father, you've lost weight. Yuan Xian hugged him tightly. It was a long time before he finally let go. How did you find this place? He asked. Ever since your highness vanished, the capital has been flooded with rumors saying that the bastard Yuan was... He trailed off under Yuan Xian's stare. Reluctantly, he amended, that the emperor was keeping you under house arrest in the palace. The Prince of Qi's residence has been surrounded for many days, so we were all beside ourselves with worry. But without your word, we dared not take any action. Wei Shu said that we must act in case something happens at the residence, so he had me seek out the princess consort to ask for your whereabouts. Then, bring all the little masters out one by one and escort them somewhere safe in case the emperor does something in a rage. So the princess consort had you take Qilong away? Yuan Xian said. Yes, said Yan Ying. She said that Qilong is the youngest and has yet to be registered in the genealogy record, so even if something happens, he'd be hard to track down. That's why she had me bring Qilong to you. His own princess consort had already thought of the worst-case scenario. Yuan Xian's heart ached, and he could only clutch the little boy tighter. But Su Wei's face was grave. Tell us, was it Wu Xian who told you to do this? Did anyone follow or see you when you were making your way over with Qilong? Yan Ying thought long and hard. There shouldn't be, he said. I was very careful. He'd just finished speaking when Shun Chao's expression shifted, and suddenly he stood up. Everyone couldn't help but look at him. Taoist Master Shun? There are many soldiers on horses coming this way, right now. Everyone's expressions abruptly filled with alarm. Su Wei roared, Quick, into the secret passage. But Yuan Xian said, It's too late. They must have tailed Yan Ying here and surrounded the Su residence in a bid to catch everyone in one go. If the Su residence doesn't turn anyone over, His Majesty will never let this go. Yan Ying slapped his thigh in frustration. Could it be? Did that bastard Wu Wei predict the princess consort would trust me and tell me your whereabouts? Is that why he's told me to seek her out? So that he could trail me here? As they spoke, a large troop of soldiers on horses had already arrived outside the Su residence, and they pounded thunderously on the gates like a raging flood. It could even be heard in the guest hall, far as it was. The Su residence's steward rushed over to report, Master, we're in trouble. There are a lot of people outside, and they say that they're here to apprehend the Prince of Qi on His Majesty's orders. If we don't open the gates, they'll storm right in. What should we do? Yuan Xian gave a long sigh. Fortune and misfortune are both determined by fate. What's ordained to come must come. Fate has ordained that I'm unable to escape. Go open the resident gates. I'll depart with them. They must not hurt anyone in the Su family. Su Wei stopped in his tracks. What do you mean, go? Even if you don't go, my Su family will still be indicted for harboring a fugitive. Why worry so much? You go hide first, and I'll go deal with them. Surely they won't dare to tear down our house. It seems that the Duke of Mayon County has no respect for His Majesty whatsoever. He'd rather harbor a fugitive and bring down his entire family. A cold laugh drifted over from afar, yet it was crisp and clear. Sue, who had no internal cultivation at all, suddenly felt each of those words drumming against his heart, making it jolt hard. At the head of the people who'd entered was Yuanqing, whom Shunqiao had traveled to Chun with. But he wasn't the one who had spoken. It was someone behind him. This man was no stranger to Shunqiao either. When he saw Shunqiao, a slight expression of surprise crossed his face. Then he immediately sneered. Taoist Master Shun, what a small world. How come I always meet you wherever I go? Murongqing, Shunqiao said coolly. Is Chunggong well? Murongqing smiled. Naturally, he's doing very well. I forgot to tell Taoist Master Shun, His Majesty has already named my master the Duke of Zhao for his great service of bringing him the Tai-E sword. Chapter 84. Kill to the last. Chunggong had split open Tai-E's hilt with carnelian back underground in Ruoqiang, retrieving the Zhuyang strategy scroll inside. To think that he'd bring the sword back with him and have it reforged. It was a famous sword from the Warring States period, and its reputation had swelled because of Qin Shi Huang. It was as though anyone possessing that sword would become the ruler of the entire world. It was no longer any use to Chunggong, but gifting it to Yuan Yun was obviously an attempt at pleasing him. And he'd succeeded. Since Chunggong could take to being Gao Wei's subordinate like a fish to water, it was little trouble to him to deal with Yuan Yun, who was a similar kind of man. As they watched a large group of men on horses surge in from outside, enclosing the Su residence within a watertight circle, the faces in the room took on a myriad of expressions, some terrified, some enraged, and some collected. Suwei's mother, Madame Qin, had also seen the disturbance. She walked out, accompanied by her second son, Su Qiao. Su Qiao had spent much time wandering the Jianghu and didn't possess the same restraint as those involved in government. The moment he saw what was going on, his tone froze over. What are you trying to do, Yuanqing? My Su family has done nothing wrong nor offended anyone. Why are you bringing all these strays here? At the implication that he was a stray, anger flashed across Murongqing's face, but he immediately suppressed it. Yuanqing seemed to have been suddenly assigned to this task and absolutely didn't want any clashes with the Su family. Hearing these words, he smiled. Su Erlang, it's been a while. A few days ago, I heard that you went to Qingcheng Mountain. I didn't expect you to return so soon. Then he turned and greeted Yuan Xian, Sui, and Madame Qin one by one. He also spoke to Shunqiao like a familiar friend. Taoist Master Shun, since our last parting, this Qing has often kept you in his thoughts. I trust that your health has improved greatly? Shunqiao inclined his head. Thank you for your concern. I've gotten much better. That's good. That's good. Thanks to Yuan Qing's quick thinking, the tense atmosphere instantly relaxed quite a bit. Only now did Yuan Qing cup his hands at Yuan Xian, getting down to business. Someone has accused the Prince of Qi, he explained. They said that the Prince of Qi was involved in the previous emperor's illness and passing. His Majesty is furious and has ordered me to bring you to the palace so you can explain yourself. If it's a wrongful accusation, you will receive justice. Nonsense! Yan Ying was the first to snap. His Highness the Prince of Qi was devoted and loyal. How could he harm the previous emperor? This is no more than an unfounded attack. Shunqiao couldn't help but glance to the side. Dou Yan was hiding behind Yuan Xian, and there was both alarm and surprise on her face. He'd always been slow when it came to scheming and plotting, and he'd always been willing to take others in complete good faith. But after everything he'd been through, Shunqiao too had begun to follow Yan Wushi's way when it came to approaching problems. Yuan knew that Do Yan had seen his act of patricide, and his uncle had also held such military power for a long time, with a whole slew of impressive military achievements. Terrified that Yuan Xian would become a threat, he'd simply opted to land the first strike by pinning the crime on Yuan Xian. Whether people believed it was not a concern. Do Yan was just a girl. Even if she did speak the truth, it would only become one of many rumors. After all, he was Yuan Yong's son. No matter how foolish he was, there was no shortage of methods he could employ as a ruler. In comparison, Yuan Xian was too passive. Today's events were unlikely to end well. Naturally, everything Shen Qiao could think of, Yuan Xian could too. Within the span of a moment, many thoughts passed through Yuan Xian's mind. In truth, back during Yuan Yong's reign, Yan Wushi had sought him out. He told him clearly that he was willing to use Huan Yuesek's power and influence to support him in accomplishing great things, replacing Yuan as the crown prince. But Yuan Xian hadn't agreed. Later, when Yuan Yong suddenly became bedridden from serious illness, Bianyan Mei too had insinuated that he needed to start making preparations. But at that time, Yuan Xian still hadn't made up his mind, and in the end, he was unwilling to do something so subversive to heaven's will. Bianyan Mei didn't urge him any further. In the end, after Yuan Yong passed, everyone within the Bian residence vanished without a trace in the span of a night. In contrast, thanks to that one mistake of his, Yuan Xian had fallen into the situation Yan Wushi predicted. Yan Wushi had once told him that the moment Yuan Yong passed, Yuan would definitely move against his uncle. And now, things had proceeded exactly as he said. Yuan Xian heaved a sigh. With an indescribable emotion twisting in his heart, he turned to Yuan Qing and said, "I am completely loyal to our sovereigns. The sun and moon can bear witness. The previous emperor knew this, and His Majesty knows this. The entirety of the court and military knows this as well. The day His Majesty passed away, I indeed visited the palace, but at that time, His Majesty was drowsing, so I left within 15 minutes. I only knew of His Majesty's passing afterward, so how could I be involved?" Yuan Qing's expression was uncomfortable. "Your esteemed words should be said before His Majesty, Prince of Qi. I'm only here as a messenger. I have no authority." "If the Prince of Qi enters the palace," said Su Wei coldly, "will he be able to leave in one piece?" Yuan Qing's mouth snapped shut, and he didn't speak. In truth, there was no need to answer this question. Everyone already knew the answer. "Yuan Dafu," Mu Rengqin said suddenly. "When we left the palace, His Majesty told us that this matter cannot be delayed. The faster we finish, the better." Displeasure surfaced on Yuan Qing's face, but in the end, he didn't refute Mu Rongqin. Instead, he said to Yuan Xian, "You heard him too, Prince of Qi. I must ask your esteemed self to please come with me." "Your Highness, you must not go," said Yan Ying anxiously. "There's no coming back. Everyone in the world knows that this is an unjust accusation, but the Emperor will never let your esteemed self go. If you give my lowly self but a single command, I will stake my life on fighting our way out of this encirclement." Mu Rongqin sneered. "His Majesty has already ensured that there will be no escape, wherever you go. Martial experts are lying in ambush all the way from here to outside the city. Even if you manage to leave this place, leaving the capital is impossible. Let's look at the bigger picture now. Everyone in the Prince of Qi's family, both young and old, is still within your residence. Is your esteemed self so callous as to watch them lose their lives?" Yan Ying roared, "Mu Rongqin, you despicable scoundrel! You wretched backstabber! What right do you have to say such things?" Madame Qin suddenly said, "For many generations, my Su family has upheld a great and illustrious reputation. Moral character is ingrained within our bones, and we lack any cowards or reprobates. The Prince of Qi has galloped across the battlefield and made great contributions in establishing the Zhou dynasty. Everyone knows this, and the common people hold him in great respect. How can you reduce him to a prisoner based on a single false charge? If His Majesty has any doubts, I'm willing to use the Su family's name to guarantee the Prince of Qi's innocence." That's right, Su Wei said as well. Our Su family is willing to testify on behalf of the Prince of Qi. Whether you testify or not, said Mu Zhongqing icily, you'll have to tell His Majesty himself. Don't obstruct us in our official duties. Today, we will take Yuan Xian with us. The rest of you need not say any more. Su Qiao glared at him furious. And what if we refuse to let you take him? Mu Rongqing slowly drew his saber from its sheath. Then I have no choice but to commit this offense. Mu Zhongxianshang. Yuan Qing's words were filled with warning. This is the Su family's second son, but he's also the personal disciple of Chunyang Monastery's Taoist master Yi on Qincheng Mountain. He turned to Yuan Xian. Mu Zhongxianshan's words are indeed correct, Prince of Qi. Even if your esteemed self escapes, the people within the Prince of Qi's residence cannot. I beseech you to consider this carefully. And if I don't escape, will His Majesty let the people from my residence off? Yuan Xian gave a miserable smile and then put Yuan Song down. He turned to Madame Qin and the others, then suddenly gave a deep bow. Yuan Xian gave your esteemed residents much trouble for these last few days. I ask the madam to forgive me. I'm grateful for your protection, but one must bear the consequences of their actions. I will leave with them today. Don't implicate yourselves because of one Yuan Xian. Prince of Qi, said Madame Qin. Yuan Xian took several steps forward and held out his hands to be arrested. Yuan Qing waved his hand, and the soldiers on either side immediately came forth to grab him. Your Highness, cried Yan Ying. Please take her of Qilang, Yan Ying, said Yuan Xian. Take him away from the capital, to his uncle's house. Yet Mu Rongqing said, The Prince of Qi worries too much. Whether it's your esteemed self's children or your subordinates, not a single person from the Prince of Qi's residence will be able to leave the city without the Emperor's permission. Yuan Xian's face fell in horror. I've already surrendered myself for arrest, but His Majesty still does this to us? Does he wish to kill us to the last? Mu Rongqing paid him no heed. Soldiers, seize Yuan Qilang as well. Yan Ying placed himself before Yuan Song, shielding him, as though he were ready to protect the child even at the cost of his life. As if Mu Rongqing would take him seriously. He pushed aside the soldiers next to him, his saber flickering alongside him. Within 3 moves, Yan Ying was already on the ground. With an expression of contempt, Mu Rongqing reached out to snatch Yuan Song. A sword suddenly appeared before him. The hand holding that sword was incredibly lovely, fair, and slender, as perfect as jade without a single flaw. Mu Rongqing was in no mood to admire it. Without thinking, he reached out to grab the sheath. But the moment he was about to grasp the sheath, he suddenly recognized the sword and realized the identity of its wielder. And then he recalled a scene within the Ruoqiang ruins, when Shen Qiao had fought the packs of apes alone. He couldn't help but pause for a moment, and this momentary lapse meant that the sheath was no longer within its reach. Mu Rongqing quickly stepped backward, evading the wind from the sword as it swept toward his face. Looking at him properly, Shen Qiao hadn't even drawn his sword. His Taoist robes fluttered, and he looked like an immortal, elegant and graceful, detached from the world. He looked more harmless than anyone else present. However, Mu Rongqing knew that it was a sham. Even if he'd looked down on Shen Qiao before, after Ruoqiang, he could never be contemptuous of the incredible strength within the Taoist ever again. He composed himself and said coolly, Taoist Master Shen, were you born in the year of the dog? Why is it that every time I meet you, you're always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong? You haven't even reached the conclusive verdict on whether the Prince of Qi is guilty, yet you're dragging in a child? Shen Qiao said. Mu Rongqing sneered. He had the guts to assassinate the previous emperor. Naturally, his entire family must pay the price. Do-Yan couldn't take it anymore. She yelled shrilly, The Prince of Qi didn't hurt the previous emperor. He was killed by Yuan. Other than Su Wei and Shen Qiao, who already knew the story, everyone's expressions filled with alarm. Yuan Qing couldn't help but blurt out, What did you just say? Misleading others with hearsay, bellowed Mu Rongqing. Capture her! Don't let any of them escape! At his words, Tuo Ba Liangzhe and Mu Zhongxun also swept in from outside. One of them grabbed at Dou Yan, the other leapt at Yuan Song. The two children were utterly powerless to put up a fight. They couldn't even see their attackers' movements clearly and could only watch helplessly as they closed in. However, neither Tuo Ba Liangzhe nor Mu Zhongxun managed to make contact. A sword glare swept over the two men, brimming with true qi. Like the wind gusting through the towers before a mountain storm, it was forceful enough that the two of them reeled back several steps. "Who dare lays a hand on them while I'm here?" said Shenqiao. His every word was tranquil and calm, yet within them was a pressure that seemed to weigh 1,000 tons. Mu Rongqing gave a savage smile. "Let me see then, Shenqiao. How are you going to protect them all by yourself?" His sword slashed in a horizontal arc as he charged forward, sweeping toward Shenqiao. "Who said he'll be by himself?" yelled Su Qiao. He blocked Mu Rongqing with his sword, then turned his head to shout to Shenqiao, "Hurry, take them away!" "So, the Su family intends to rebel?" raged Mu Rongqing. "What we want is not rebellion, but justice." Madame Qing's sandalwood wooden cane thudded heavily into the ground. The cane instantly split into two, and she pulled out a long sword from within. Its blade was like autumn water and infused with murderous intent. A single glance was enough to tell that the weapon was renowned and precious. Su Wei hadn't known that the cane always by his mother's side had held such an incredible secret. For a moment, he was dumbstruck. The two sides immediately fell into a disordered mass of fighting, and the Su residence transformed into a battlefield. Yan Ying still wanted to rescue Yuan Xian, but Yuan Xian yelled, "If I leave with you, it will serve to confirm my guilt in plotting the previous emperor's murder. Take Qilong and leave with Dao's master Shun. Run as far as you can and never come back." "Your Highness!" Yan Ying's eyes bulged with rage. He couldn't accept this. Instead, it was Yuan Song who spoke. "Father wishes to use his death as an admonishment to clear the emperor's mind. That way this chaos will abate too." "Exactly. Now hurry up and go." Yuan Xian was both gratified and sorrowful. Gratified at how wise and clear-minded his youngest son was at such a tender age. In the future, he would be outstanding within his generation. But he was sorrowful that he would never have the chance to see him grow up. "If you take me with you, you'll never be able to leave. Furthermore, I cannot abandon everyone at the Prince of Qi's residence." Yuan Song suddenly fell to his knees and kowtowed thrice to Yuan Xian. Tears flowing down his cheeks like rain, Yuan Xian turned his head away. Yan Ying's eyes were bloodshot. He gritted his teeth and quickly ran forward to pick up Yuan Song, then ran over to meet up with Shenqiao, who was carrying Dou Yan. With the help of the cover provided by Su Qiao and the others, the two of them rushed out of the Su residence in the direction of the city gates. A scream came from behind them, closely followed by Mu Rongqing's callous voice. "In the event that Yuan Xian resists, His Majesty has commanded that he be killed on the spot to serve as a warning to others." While Mu Rongxun and Tuo Ba Liangzhe were holding off Madame Qing and the others, Mu Rongqing had taken the opportunity to kill Yuan Xian. He'd even deliberately made more noise, letting Shenqiao and the others hear it. "Bastard!" Yan Ying was so enraged, he halted. In his arms, Yuan Song had tears streaming down his face. "Don't turn back," yelled Shenqiao. "We need to get out first." Mu Rongqing had already caught up to them from behind. Holding Dou Yan in one arm, Shenqiao turned around and slashed. However, Mu Rongqing had once been the #1 martial expert in Qi, and now he was also Cheng Gong's right-hand man. Naturally, a single slash wouldn't be enough. His figure flitted swiftly, and his swordplay was unpredictable. He excelled at discerning and striking at his opponent's weak points. But Mu Rongqing knew very well that Shenqiao was no longer someone he could kill. So he kept close to him and only targeted Dou Yan. This would distract Shenqiao by forcing him to protect Dou Yan, thus revealing openings. At the same time, it slowed Shenqiao down. Surrounded by the flash of weapons, Dou Yan's face was full of terror, yet she said nothing. She only clung tightly to Shenqiao's neck so as not to distract him for even a moment. Mu Rongqing said severely, "Shenqiao, you're carrying a little child, and on top of that, you need to tend to those two. Waiting for you on the road from here to outside the city gates are martial experts even stronger than I am. How far do you think you can get by yourself?" Shen Xiao remained unmoved. "With the Dao, even tens of thousands of enemies will be unable to cease my advance." His sword chi surged, and Mu Rongqing was unable to withstand it. As if he'd been struck heavily on the chest, he spat out a mouthful of blood. However, he didn't cower away from the light fight, but laughed instead, the sound full of mockery. "Dao? And just what is this Dao of yours? During these tumultuous times, only might makes right. If your Dao were of any use, why did you suffer setback after setback? Why did you lose even your position as Xuandu Mountain's sect leader? If your Dao were of any use, why has the enlightened ruler you so believed in yet to appear?" At these words, Shen Xiao gave a faint smile. This smile was like a breeze caressing spring waves, stirring up ripples within people's hearts. It seemed capable of placating even the rage of the rivers and mountains. The nearby Douyan stared at him in a trance. Suddenly, she forgot her fear, forgot that she was in danger and surrounded on all sides. Many decades later, she would still never forget this smile. However, Shen Xiao spoke not a word, for concealed within this smile were thousands of words of meaning. Those who'd understand would understand. As for those who didn't, what point was there in wasting your words? People of different Dao must go their separate ways. The falling leaves rustled, the chill wind whistled. His once stolid and majestic swordplay underwent a dramatic change, suddenly filling with destructive force. This was the new set of sword techniques that Shen Qiao had created after the battle with Kunye at Bixia sect, born from him merging his comprehension of the sword into his sword play. Every single move was simple and straightforward, without any fancy tricks, and Mu Rongqing too thoughtful that he'd parried him. But somehow, every time he tried to block and counter, his saber would involuntarily veer off or simply fail to achieve the desired effect. Instead, it felt like Shen Qiao was leading him around by the nose. Shen Qiao held Douyan with one arm, fending away his opponent with the other. Yet he still managed to force Mu Rongqing into a situation where he was helpless to fight back. Another mouthful of blood spilled forth. Mu Rongqing slammed hard into the wall behind him, and before he could react, the tip of Shen Qiao's sword quivered once, and his sword chi turned substantial, striking an important acupoint in his shoulder and leaving him unable to move. Shen Qiao had no desire to fight, so he didn't pause for even a moment. With a tap of his toes, he swept toward Yan Ying. At this moment, Yan Ying had brought Yuan Song almost to the city gates. Having come from a military background, his martial skills lay in the life-or-death struggles found on the battlefield. His Qinggong wasn't particularly advanced. At this moment, he mustered up his entire strength, hoping that he could dash out of the city and take Yuan Song far away from danger to fulfill the Prince of Qi's request. Something whistled through the air. He tilted his head to avoid the arrow shooting over from atop the nearby city gates. As expected, it was as Mu Rongqing had said. Soldiers had been lying in ambush for a while. Every single one of them had their arrows knocked. As long as they released thousands of arrows in tandem, Yan Ying and Yuan Song would be perforated like honeycomb. Yan Ying didn't pause for a moment. Instead, he sped up. Dropping his chin, he said to Yuan Song, "Qilang, you must listen to me. In the next moment, I shall shield you. Once this shower of arrows abates, they'll need to re-knock their arrows. Take this short respite to run along the city walls. There lies a small door that is unlocked. I'll guard your back. Only think about running forward. Taoist Master Shun is right behind us, and he'll catch up very soon. At that time, just follow him. Pay no heed to anything else, and whatever you do, don't look back. Do you understand?" Yuan Xian had dearly loved Yuan Song from a young age, believing him to be the most promising of all the Yuan family's children. And this was proof of how intelligent he was. How could he fail to understand the implication behind Yan Ying's words? Hearing these words, he gritted his teeth hard. "Uncle Yan!" Yan Ying knew he'd understood. His lips stretched into a grimace, and he evaded the arrows pelting down from above. A short while later, his back was pierced through with arrows. But he only grabbed Yuan Song harder, his feet not slowing for even an instant. He raced toward the unlocked side door while carrying Yuan Song. Many soldiers wielding spears came to impede him, but he beat each of them back. "Go! Hurry up and go! Run outside!" he yelled and released Yuan Song. "Don't shoot! Hold!" A figure dashed atop the city gates, stopping the soldiers who were preparing to fire a second volley of arrows. When the gate guards saw who the newcomer was, none of them dared to act rashly. However, the person next to the guard said, "Continue shooting. Without my command, no one's allowed to stop." "Hold!" Puliu Rujian yelled. "Commander-in-Chief, His Majesty didn't order you to kill Prince of Qi's entire family. Why are you doing this?" Liu Fang laughed. "Duke of Sui, I remember that the Prince of Qi, Yuan Xian, once advised the previous emperor to be wary of you. Yet you don't hate him. Instead, you're stepping forward to speak for him? What is the logic here?" "The Prince of Qi's advice to the former emperor was simply him carrying out his duties," said Puliu Rujian. "It was his desire to help the public. I'm not so wretched that I lack even this tiny amount of tolerance. But this child is innocent. Why not let him go, Commander-in-Chief? Consider it a good deed." Liu Fang reconsidered. Yuan Xian held incredible prestige with both the court and the common folk. Now, the emperor's attack had been too abrupt, so many people were caught off guard and unable to respond. Once this storm passed, there would certainly be many people coming forth to plead on behalf of the Prince of Qi's family. So why should Liu Fang involve himself in something so inauspicious? "Very well," he said. "I'll leave the Duke of Sui some face. However, I must remind you that it's useless even if I show mercy. His Majesty has already dispatched martial experts to lie in ambush outside the city. Even if this child manages to leave these gates, only death awaits him still." Puliu Rujian's heart thumped once, and he couldn't resist turning to look at the area beyond the city. From high up, he saw, crystal clear, Yuan Song stumble out of the city gates, but 3 people were already walking toward him. One was bald, one was missing an arm, and the last had lost all his limbs, an impressive air about him. Any of those 3 would count as top-class martial artists within the Jianghu. Using them to surround a little child was truly like cracking a nut with a sledgehammer. Puliu Rujian didn't recognize the bald man, nor the one-armed one, but he did recognize the leftmost one. Chengong? His Majesty placed so much importance on Yuan Song that he even sent Chengong? Everyone knew that Duke of Zhao, Chengong, had won the emperor over and was his new favorite official. He'd presented him with Tai and introduced He Huan sect to him, thus diluting the authority of the Buddhist discipline. While they were at it, He Huan sect also replaced the influence Huan Yue sect once had in their close relationship with the crown. Yuan was leaping to establish a system of checks and balances, and so Chengong garnering his favor had gone as smoothly as water flowing through a canal. At Puliu Rujian's side, Liu Fang said, "One must pull the grass up by the roots. Everyone speaks of how gifted and intelligent Yuan Qilang is. His Majesty fears that letting him go will be like returning a tiger to its lair, thus planting latent threats for himself in the future." During their conversation, Yuan Song had already stopped in his tracks. He stared at the 3 people before him, as if he didn't know how to respond. Bao Yuan smiled at him. "Yuan Qilang, I advise you not to run anymore. His Majesty ordered us to capture you, dead or alive. If you listen and return with us, you'll save yourself much physical suffering." Puliu Rujian watched from afar and sighed to himself. Was even the last of the Yuan family bloodline doomed to vanish here? As he thought this, he saw a man's silhouette flit over from within the city. When the man saw that the gates were shut, he simply leapt into the air. As if he were treading on clouds, he soared up and up. Before anyone on the wall could react, he'd already flown past them and was drifting downward, now below the walls. Like a river nymph stepping gracefully on the waves, his feet picked up nary a mote of dust, a rainbow stretching across the heavens, scattering into the distant winds. This level of Qinggong had truly achieved transcendence. Even those like Liu Fang and Puliru Jian were already dumbstruck, let alone the other soldiers. Addressing the three gentlemen who lost to me, please forgive this humble Taoist for arriving late. As if he descended from heaven, Shen Chao landed before the trio, holding Dou Yan in his arms. Chapter 55. A Radiant Showing. Everyone had already been long acquainted with each other. No introductions were needed for their reunion this time. One of Yan Shou's arms had been lost to Shen Chao's hands, so the moment he saw him, his murderous intent surged. More than anyone else here, he wished to kill Shen Chao and satisfy his hatred. But Qinggong still managed to smile. It's been a while since we parted at Ruochang. Has Taoist Shen been well? Shen Chao seemed unwilling to speak with him, and he didn't even bother with a perfunctory response. In the past, Qinggong had possessed an astonishingly high sense of pride. Whenever he encountered someone looking down on him, he'd explode into a rage, rolling up his sleeves to brawl with them without a second word. However, times had changed. Now he held great power and standing, so his outlook and mind had expanded to match. Not only did Shen Chao's cold shoulder fail to anger him, he instead began to persuade him with a pleasant smile. Taoist Master Shen, Buddhism and Taoism were prohibited for a long time. But the moment His Majesty ascended, he removed those bans. Does the Taoist Master understand what this means? Shen Chao still remembered. Back then at the broken-down temple, Qinggong had regarded even a single donkey meat sandwich as a treasure, and he'd barely even been able to read. Yet now, he was talking to Shen Chao about the emperor's goals in lifting the bans of Buddhism and Taoism. In all likelihood, the stepmother who'd thrown Shen Chao out of the house would scarcely be able to dream what her stepson had become in the present. When he compared the two, Shen Chao could only feel that life was truly unpredictable and unfathomable, especially during turbulent times. As long as a person was willing to throw away their shame and ethics, as long as they were ambitious, bold, and unscrupulous enough, they could become like Qinggong, a role model who'd encourage others to advance themselves to greater heights. What does it mean? Shen Chao asked indifferently. Qinggong smiled. It means that His Majesty holds no prejudices toward Buddhism and Taoism, he said. Regardless of which discipline, as long as they're willing to pledge allegiance to the court, His Majesty will extend to them fair and equal treatment. Taoist Master Shen is from Xuandu Mountain. Once, you were chosen as its sect leader, one who was absolutely dutiful. Yet villains took advantage of you and stole your position. If you wish, His Majesty is willing to fully support you in recovering your position. Currently, Xuandu Mountain's standing within the Taoist discipline is gradually being supplanted by Qingcheng Mountain. But with the court's support, regaining its glory as the world's foremost Taoist sect would be as simple as snapping one's finger. What does Taoist Master Shen think? Dou Yan was bright. Though what he was saying about the various power factions within the Jianghu was beyond her knowledge, she could discern the intent at persuasion within Qinggong's words. The other side had 3 people, yet they seemed so terrified of the strength of this Taoist master carrying her that they'd rather try luring him in with benefits first than come to blows with him. Was this enough to persuade Shen Chao? Dou Yan was a little anxious, and she couldn't help but clutch his lapels a little tighter. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Yuan Song, whose hand was currently in Shen Chao's. Though his face was stiff, his gaze too revealed some anxiousness. He was clearly worried about the same thing. Bao Yuan joined in. That's right, Taoist Master Shen. Eternal friends doesn't exist in this world, and neither do eternal enemies. Hu Huan sect has offended you in the past, but that's because we were on different sides, serving our own masters. Before, Sang Jingxing told me that the reason you fell into his hands back then was that Yan Wushi restrained you and served you to him, then lured him with his words. That's why he made an oversight. In the end, our common enemy should be Yan Wushi. His Majesty wishes to draw in talent from all over the world. Our He Huan sect was at odds with the Buddhist sects in the past, but now we are willing to dedicate ourselves to His Majesty. If the Taoist sects join in as well, it would make for an even more wonderful story. Once the world is unified, Taoism's standing will surge like a boat on rising waters. With how much His Majesty values Taoism, His Majesty would be absolutely delighted to grant you even the position of state preceptor, never mind Xuandu Mountain's sect leader. He'd already witnessed Shen Chao's strength that day. Yan Shou's arm had been severed before his eyes. Bao Jun had assessed that even if he fought Shen Chao, his fate wouldn't be much better than Yan Shou's. As for Yan Shou, he wished to exact revenge for his arm, but he was not blinded by hatred. Against such a powerful opponent, he naturally couldn't take him on alone. If Bai Zhong were here, she would certainly be filled with awe. When she'd first met Shen Chao, he had been blind and downtrodden, without even a shred of martial arts. He could only lie down to be trampled by others. Yet, within the span of a few years, Shen Chao, who'd once had nothing, whom everyone could walk over, had climbed up, step by step, to the point where even He Huan sect elders wouldn't be willing to battle him without preparation. When the previous emperor was alive, I once entered the palace and met him, said Shen Chao. At that time, he already mentioned his willingness to lend me a hand, to make Xuandu Violet Mountain a cornerstone of Taoism. If I were to agree, I'd have agreed back then. Why would I wait until now? If we were to discuss prestige and integrity, surely the previous emperor was more reliable than Yuan Yuan. His contempt for Yuan Yuan was clear in his words. Very well, said Chen Gong. It seems like Taoist Master Shen would rather risk himself for these two utterly unrelated little children. Then Chen will give you a reminder out of consideration for our past friendship. To do this is to directly oppose the court. From now on, the Buddhists, He Huan sect, and even members of the court itself will never accept you. Once the Zhou dynasty unifies the world, you'll become the common enemy of everyone beneath heaven. Have you thought it through carefully? Shen Chao showed an expression of slight astonishment. Friendship, he repeated. What friendship do we have? The friendship whereby you sold me for personal gain? Where in order to avoid becoming Mutipo's male concubine, you directed the disaster to me? To think a day would come where this kind gentleman would jeer at someone. If not for Chen Gong's utter shamelessness and his terrible impression of He Huan sect, Shen Chao wouldn't have spoken these words either. At this mention of the past, a strange expression flashed across Chen Gong's face. There was embarrassment, guilt, as well as rage. It was like his face had been physically ripped off. He seethed with pain. You are always behind the times, Shen Chao, he sneered. Since that's the case, you can't blame me. Yan Shou had been gnashing his teeth at Shen Chao for a while. In his eyes, Bao Yuan's and Chen Gong's words were utter drivel. In the Jianghu, agency was given according to one's fists. The one who punched the hardest, whose martial arts were the strongest, had the final say. The loss of his arm that day was a deep shame, one that he'd never forget his entire life. Regardless of whether Shen Chao agreed to Chen Gong's persuading, he would kill him. So as soon as those words were out of Chen Gong's mouth, Yan Shou suddenly sprang forth, throwing himself at Yuan Song next to Shen Chao with a speed of lightning. His goal was clear. He'd attack Yuan Song, distracting Shen Chao by forcing him to protect him and reveal a weak point. Yan Shou's speed was immense. His plan had only just formed, and his hand had already reached Yuan Song, just about to graze his hair. As expected, Shen Chao lifted his sword to block, and Yan Shou had already predicted this. He suddenly twisted to strike at Do Yan within Shen Chao's arms. If this blow connected, landing right on the crown of Do Yan's head, it was certain the girl's skull would split open and she'd die, hemorrhaging all over her face. Naturally, Bao Yuan and Chen Gong didn't just sit back. The moment Yan Shou attacked, the two of them moved as well, attacking Shen Chao from separate directions. Chen Gong's martial skills seemed to have improved again since Ruoqiang. His sword moved like the rolling waves, as swiftly as a poisonous snake, accompanied by layers of rippling true qi. A careful study revealed that his martial arts contained extraordinary multitudes. They were the amalgamation of the strengths of multiple schools. Chen Gong began as a court favorite. Shen Chao had given him a glimpse of the martial path, but the one who'd personally taught him martial arts was Mutipo. However, Mutipo's martial prowess could only be considered second-rate, and Chen Gong quickly realized that what he could learn from him was limited. With his incredible talent and perfect memory, he began to set ever grander goals. After he began following the Emperor of Qi, Gao Wei, Cheng Gong was naturally able to meet even more of Qi's martial experts. Among these were Mu Zhongqin and the people of He Huan sect. Cheng Gong integrated the martial arts he'd learned from the Juyang strategy scroll that he'd unconsciously memorized, and unbeknownst to him, he began to climb higher and higher up the martial path. As someone this gifted, akin to fine jade, he might not be inferior to the likes of Shen Chao or Yan Wushi. He could even surpass them. If Tao Hongjing were here, he'd also have praised him, declaring him a heaven-blessed prodigy. Tumultuous times produced not only heroes, but ambitious conquerors as well. This world had given Cheng Gong plenty of space to extend himself. He was destined to be extraordinary. Here and now, the sword move he struck against Yan Chao seemed to contain a modified version of Mu Rongqin's saber techniques, but also a branch of Zhongnan sect's sword techniques. It carried both the severe imperiousness of the saber as well as the flitting agility of Zhongnan sect's sword. The sword qi rose in flurries, like white snow or fluttering catkins drifting down flake by flake. They seemed everywhere, yet almost imperceptible, and so they were difficult for an opponent to read. Yan Shou was filled with loathing, while Bao Yuan was waiting for a chance to strike Shen Chao unawares. On top of that, Cheng Gong kept oppressively close with every step he took. None of the three were easy pickings, yet Shen Chao used only one arm to fend them off, still holding Dou Yan in the other. Furthermore, he needed to protect Yuan Song, all while facing attacks pelting down at him from every direction, like an all-encompassing net that left him no room for escape. But Shen Chao didn't run. In fact, he didn't even back up. He drew his sword from its sheath, then slashed horizontally at the three enemies approaching from three directions. He only used a single move, and it was one without flourish, plain and ordinary. However, atop the city gates and sweating in fear, Puliu Rujian could faintly hear the sound of roaring waves, almost as though they were rolling in from the distant horizon. Yet, they also sounded like a rumbling coming from deep within the earth. He could see very clearly that as Shen Chao's sword swept outward, the blade seemed to transform into white waves that undulated outward instantly, one by one. When filled with true strength, all things became ephemeral. True art is unassuming, and simplicity is the greatest sophistication. Cheng Gong, Yan Shou, and Bao Yuan, the white waves engulfed all three of them. And though there was clearly only one Shen Chao, he seemed to have split into many. All three of his assailants felt an incomparable oppressiveness, and not only were their attacks nullified, they rebounded back to the men, forcing them to suffer their own techniques. Liu Fang was no stranger to martial arts, and he immediately shouted in alarm, "Is that Shen Chao a monster? How did he suddenly split himself into innumerable copies?" "That's a type of illusion," explained Puliu Rujian, "derived from his echelon of the sword. When it comes to the path of his sword, Shen Chao's achievements there have already attained the pinnacle of perfection. I fear that even if you compared him to the Qifengge of the past, he has already surpassed his master." Even Liu Fang had heard of Qifengge before. There were only a few grandmaster-level martial artists in the world, but each of those grandmasters could doubtlessly enter the midst of thousands of horseback soldiers, behead a specific person, and leave without issue. The court would do everything to win them over. Even someone as headstrong as Yuan Yong had relied heavily on Yan Wushi, and he'd never put on an emperor's airs before him. Currently, Shen Chao might lack tempering compared to a true grandmaster, but his tempering wouldn't take 8 or 10 years to achieve. Hearing this, Liu Fang became somewhat afraid, and he hurriedly said, "Just now, I didn't order them to shoot at Shen Chao. You saw that too, Duke of Sui. We were under the emperor's orders. We had no choice. If Taoist Master Shen misunderstands anything, you must help me clear it up." Puliu Rujian agreed. Yes, the commander-in-chief has his official duties and possesses no personal motives. Jian naturally understands. Liu Fang inwardly breathed a sigh of relief. His gaze was drawn back to the fighting beneath them. "Do you think Cheng Gong's group can win?" They weren't the only people watching this fight. The soldiers atop the gates were staring fixedly at this peerlessly marvelous altercation. Beneath their gazes, weapons danced and flashed, murderous intent surging in all directions. Shanchao continued to protect the two little children, yet despite this burden, he was able to move with ease. The soldiers couldn't help but show expressions of admiration. The people of these times valued heroes. Although they were hampered by the emperor's orders and forced to attack Yuan Song, Yuan Xian had always possessed great prestige within the military. Shanchao should have had nothing to do with this, yet he was willing to place himself in danger for two small children. How could the common person, seeing this level of broad-mindedness and sentimentality, not be filled with deep veneration? The day Shanchao had killed Kun Ye, only the members of Bixia sect had been present. Though it was an earth-shattering scene, very few people knew about it. But at this time, all eyes were on him as he fought against heavy odds, single-handedly overcoming greater numbers. With this battle, his name was destined to shake the world itself. Shanchao shielded Yuan Song behind him as he held Dou Yan in one arm. He constructed layer upon layer of sword screens, temporarily warding off Cheng Gong and Bao Yun. The blade's edge quivered. Then, like the bright moon piercing through the clouds, its radiance overflowed and it thrust viciously at Yan Shou. Yan Shou sent out 3 palm strikes in succession, yet they all rebounded out of the sword qi, forcing him to fall back several steps. He thought that with Cheng Gong and Bao Yun's participation, Shanchao would be overwhelmed and unable to pay attention to him. Never did he imagine that Shanchao would ignore the other two entirely. The sword qi swept forth with a force that could overturn rivers and seas, rolling toward him. He quickly raised his palm to meet it, but the instant he raised his arm, he felt an unbearable piercing pain. The sword glare had already reached his face. His entire hand was engulfed within the boundless white light. The pain was like the day he'd lost his arm. He couldn't help the terror surging within his heart, and for the first time in his life, he wanted to turn tail and flee. His will to fight vanished, his murderous intent forcibly wiped clean. At this moment, all Yan Shou could think of was escaping in one piece. But he'd forgotten. The moment the thought of retreat had arisen, he'd already lost. The boundless sword glare monopolized his vision, but there was only one sword, and what pierced through Yan Shou's back and into his heart was also only that one sword. Yan Shou lowered his head. He saw the point of Shan He Tong Bei already dyed red. That was his blood. The blood-stained Shan He Tong Bei continued to hum. It was a very quiet sound, but Yan Shou strangely found that he could hear it, and very clearly at that. Perhaps because the blade was buried inside his body. Before he could even confirm this, Shanchao had already yanked the sword out of his back. Yan Shou stumbled forward several steps, then collapsed to his knees with a thud. Behind him, the fight continued, but his participation was no longer required. Filled with awe, Pu Liu Rujian couldn't help but yell from atop the city gates, "A true hero indeed!" Though the people around him said nothing, their expressions clearly showed that they felt the same. No matter the time and place, such an illustrious hero should be praised and admired. Below the city walls, Yan Shou's death filled Bao Yun and Cheng Gong's faces with alarm, but they didn't cease their attack. Instead, with the cutting fierceness of a tempest, they both chose to avoid a direct confrontation with Shanchao, instead targeting Dou Yan and Yuan Song. Since Shanchao had chosen to make these two children his weak spots, attacking these children was a message. In matters of life and death, all that was important was victory or defeat, and regardless of the means. If they couldn't kill Shanchao today, he would definitely become a fatal calamity to them in the future. This thought surfaced almost simultaneously within Cheng Gong and Bao Yun's minds. Cheng Gong's blade was incredibly swift, but Bao Yun's moves were more of an uncanny kind. One attacked from the left and the other from the right, as they worked in tandem. Both knew that, regardless of how powerful Shanchao's sword qi was, it couldn't flow ceaselessly like an inexhaustible river. Shanchao also sprinted toward Yuan Song, but it wasn't to shield him. Instead, he tossed Dou Yan to him. Even without his instructions, Yuan Song understood what he was doing in an instant. He stretched out both arms and caught Dou Yan, who was a full head shorter than him. With a furl of his sleeves, Shen Chao flung the two of them several yards away, then turned around and swept back. He charged with the force of a great, surging wave, his figure like an arching stone bridge, surging upward as it displayed itself. One could vaguely see that might of a king descending from the heavens, a complete reversal from the unbiased and tranquil energy released by his sword in the past. Chang Gong dissolved this momentum entirely, then stabbed his blade into Shen Chao's sword screen, his movements confident and smooth. Delight surged within him. But that same instant, he was stunned to realize that his target had somehow become Bao Jun. Behind him! His sense of vigilance elicited. He abruptly turned his head and saw a blast of sword chi roar outward. But Bao Jun had also encountered the same misdirection, and he couldn't pull back in time. His palm struck toward Chang Gong. Chang Gong, halfway through his sword move, was forced to hurriedly withdraw. He leaned to one side to avoid the blast from Bao Jun's palm. Yet Shen Chao neither swayed nor moved. He became one with his sword as he rushed toward Bao Yun. When two tigers fought, one must inevitably fall. Initially, Bao Yun had used all his strength in this palm blast, but was forced to withdraw half his internal energy when his target suddenly became Chang Gong. However, now that he'd already struck out, it was difficult to restrain his momentum. Together with his sword glare, Shen Chao charged toward him like an outpouring of raging waves, carrying the momentum of 1,000 tons. Fresh blood spurted from Bao Yun's body. In the blink of an eye, a bloody hole had opened in his throat. To think that 2 elders from He Huan's sect had died at Shen Chao's sword, one after the other, was unbelievable. Chang Gong could see that the situation was dire. Right as Shen Chao had stabbed his sword at Bao Yun just now, he turned around and begun sprinting toward the 2 children. Their goal today had always been to detain Yuan Song. It was Yan Shou who'd moved by himself, dead set on killing Shen Chao. If he could just bring Yuan Song away now, his mission would be considered accomplished. But he'd never expected that Shen Chao's sword had already attained such heights. Though he had just killed Bao Yun, he was already sprinting toward Chang Gong, his Qinggong so brilliant that he practically left no trace. With that speed, even if Chang Gong managed to grab Yuan Song, he'd still have to fight Shen Chao directly. On one hand, the grass must be pulled up by the roots. On the other hand, his life would be in danger. There was no doubt which was more important to Chang Gong. Chang Gong made his decision promptly. He abandoned Yuan Song and twisted his body around to sprint toward the city. He pushed his Qinggong to the utmost, stepping along the jutting bricks within the wall. In the blink of an eye, he was already atop the gates. Shen Chao had no intention of giving chase. Carrying Do Yan and Yuan Song, he sprinted in the opposite direction instead. He sheathed his sword and, with a child in each arm, Shen Chao sprinted a mile or 2 in one go, running until they were well out of the sight of the city gates. Only then did he stop. He placed the 2 children down and stumbled forward several steps before coughing up a large mouthful of blood. "That was Master Shen!" Do Yan cried out in alarm as she quickly ran up to support him. Though Yuan Song didn't speak, he too had grabbed Shen Chao's other arm as he struggled to support the majority of Shen Chao's weight. "It's no problem." Shen Chao held his chest as he strenuously tried to comfort the 2, his mouth filled with the salty sweet taste of blood. Bao Yun and the others weren't amateurs. Even if they didn't rank among the top 10, martial experts of the level it took to become an elder within He Huan sect were still rare within the Jianghu. With Shen Chao's current level of ability, killing 2 of them in the same breath sounded impressive, but he'd paid quite a steep price as well. Fighting their fight just now, he'd suffered several palm strikes. Had Chang Gong not been fooled and frightened by the unyielding facade he'd forcibly put on and observed him carefully instead, he wouldn't have found it difficult to realize that Shen Chao's strength was spent, flagging like an arrow nearing the end of its flight. Tears welled up in Do Yan's eyes, but she forcibly held them back. "You must not cry," Yuan Song said to her. "Ahead of us is a pavilion. I've been there before. Let's go there and sit for a while." Shen Chao thought about how none of the city soldiers had come out to pursue them when they'd been fighting earlier. It seemed that quite a few people were secretly sympathizing and assisting regarding Yuan Xian's affairs. Determining there shouldn't be any danger for now, he didn't force out his true qi to take them away. Do Yan quickly nodded, and the two of them supported Shen Qiao as they continued onward. After a fairly short walk, they turned a corner and saw a small pavilion as expected. However, there were two people standing inside, and there was also a horse tied outside. "It's father!" Before Shen Qiao could react, Do Yan's sharp eyes had already recognized the other man, but she didn't abandon Shen Qiao and kept supporting him until they reached the pavilion. Only when they were inside did she leap over. "Father!" "Ah, Yan!" Do Yi grabbed his daughter in a tight embrace, his face full of worry instantly transforming into surprised joy. Observing this scene, Yuan Song couldn't help but recall his own father and his tragic death. He had held back his tears as long as he could, but now they finally trickled down his face. A hand covered his head and gently caressed it, bringing with it warmth. It was Shen Qiao. Yuan Song didn't speak, and he didn't sob, but he couldn't resist pressing closer to Shen Qiao, snuggling up toward him. Within a short period of time, a sense of wordless trust and tacit understanding had formed between them, something they'd obtained through their life and death ordeal. Do Yi cupped his hands at Shen Qiao and bowed. "I'm grateful to the esteemed Taoist Master Shen for saving my daughter. Yi will never forget this great kindness and virtue for the rest of his life." This gratefulness came from the depths of his heart. Hence, he'd even used the most respectful title for Taoists when addressing Shen Qiao. In the past, Shen Qiao's master, Qi Fengge, too, had been addressed as esteemed Taoist master. "Do Lang Jun need not be so courteous." Shen Qiao's voice was somewhat hoarse and feeble. "This lowly one is Zhongnan sect's Zhang Sun Sheng," said the man who stood next to Do Yi. "I met esteemed Taoist Master Shen once back during the Su family's birthday banquet. Perhaps you still remember me?" He fished a small bottle from his lapels. "These are jade dew pills. Zhangnan sect uses them to heal internal injuries, and they are quite effective. Please take them, esteemed Taoist Master Shen." Shen Qiao didn't show him any deference. He thanked him and took the bottle. "The injustice suffered by the Prince of Qi is known to all," said Zhang Sun Sheng. "It's unfortunate that his great achievements ended up threatening the emperor, who reacted so perversely, framing your own loyal subject. Everyone is enraged but too afraid to speak. Because Sheng still has his family to take care of, he'd had many misgivings about what he should do. But seeing the esteemed Taoist master's deeds today, I am deeply ashamed. Please accept this bow from Sheng." Shen Qiao reached out to stop him. "There are thousands of Tao, and the path everyone chooses is different. There was never anything to criticize. If not for your support behind the scenes, I wouldn't have been able to extricate myself so smoothly. The Su family isn't like me. I'm alone in this world, without any attachments. But the entire Su clan, young and old, remain in Chang'an, yet they still fought together with me against Yuan just now. Will they be all right?" "Yes," said Zhang Sun Sheng. "Please be at ease. I'm from Zhangnan sect, and the Zhang Sun family still has some connections in Chang'an. We can secretly bring the whole Su family over to Zhangnan sect for refuge. Your esteemed self can also bring Yuan Qilang up the mountain. Zhangnan sect may not be a large or famous sect, but we still possess enough courage to face the Lord of Zhou's underlings." Yet Shen Qiao shook his head. "No, Zhangnan Mountain is too close to Chang'an. If Yuan wishes to pursue things to the end, we won't be able to stay for that long in the end. I wish to bring him further away, until we're completely out of danger. Then we'll see." Zhang Sun Sheng and Do Yi shared a glance. "Very well," said Zhang Sun Sheng. "The horse is no winged steed, but it's still a fine mount of the sort that's hard to come by. Your health isn't very good, esteemed Taoist master, so I believe that riding should be much more convenient than walking." Okay, everyone, we have officially finished the third volume of Thousand Autumns, also known as Qianqiu by Meng Ci Shi. And you know what? I'm not really gonna say anything. Why? Because I've been reading for the past 2.5, 3 hours to make up for lost time. My voice is tired, my mouth is dry, and I too am tired, and I really need to go to bed because it's 2:48. a.m. So the only thing I can say to you all is that Shen Chao is a beast. I love this man and his evolution and his growth so freaking much. And every time Meng Ci Shi writes him fighting or even like mentally evolving, it is just the most beautiful crap in the world. I shouldn't even use the word crap. I'm sleepy. I would not use that word and Shonchal in the same sentence. Unless I'm saying he experienced crap. Okay, I'm rambling. I'm gonna go. We officially start the 4th volume of this thing next video. I love you guys. Goodbye. 我爱你们.